Panchama, the fifth one. Kapila, Kapila, Nama of the name. Siddhesha, the foremost amongst the perfect. Kala, time. Viplutam, lost. Provacha, said. Asuraye, unto the Brahmana named Asuri. Sankyam, metaphysics. Tattvagrama, the sum total of the creative elements. Vinirnayam, exposition. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. The fifth incarnation, named Lord Kapila, is foremost amongst perfected beings. He gave an exposition of the creative elements and metaphysics to Asuri Brahmana, for in course of time this knowledge had been lost. Please repeat. The fifth incarnation, named Lord Kapila, is foremost amongst perfected beings. He gave an exposition of the creative elements and metaphysics to Asuri Brahmana. For in the course of time, this knowledge had been lost. Purport. The sum total of the creative elements is 24 in all. Each and every one of them is explicitly explained in the system of Sankhya philosophy. Sankhya philosophy is generally called metaphysics by the European scholars. The etymological meaning of Sankhya is that which explains very lucidly by analysis of the material elements. This was done for the first time by Lord Kapila, who said herein to be the fifth line in the line of incarnations. The fifth incarnation, named Lord Kapila, is the foremost amongst perfected beings. He gave an explanation of the creative elements and metaphysics to Asuri Brahmana. In the course of time, this knowledge had been lost. Om Vishnu Vidaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutaya Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Tanamane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Vacharane Nirvishesha Shnivadi Paskyatyade Siddharane. Kapila Deva is also known as the son of Devahuti. Devahuti Kapila Deva. There are two Kapila Devas. One is the atheistic Kapila Deva, and the other is the son of Devahuti, who propounded Sankhya Yoga, but also Bhakti Yoga. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Yat Sankhya Yoga Spritag Balava Pravadanti Napandita Ekam Apyasita Samyag Ubhaya Vedate Palam. That only the ignorant speak of the Sankhya Yoga, the analytical study of the material world, as being different from Karma Yoga or devotional service. Those who are wise know that both of them, Yat Sankhya Prapatestana, Tadana Sankhya. Ekam, one who studies, one who becomes well versed in one of them, achieves the results of both. Sankhya Yoga Pritag Bala Pravadanti Nipandita. Ekam Apyasita Samyag Ubhaya Vidate Pulam. He gets the results of both. Yat Sankhya Prapate Stanam Tadeo Apigamyate Ekam Sankhya to Yogam Jagya Pashyati Sapashyati. The one who knows, one who can see properly that this is Yat Sankhya Prapate Stanam Tad Yoga Apigamyate. One who knows that the position reached by means of analytical study can also be attained by devotional service. Therefore sees that analytical study and devotional service be on the same level, sees things as they are. In other words, if we understand the material energy in relationship to Krishna, then we won't see it as material energy anymore. We'll see it as spiritual energy. So Sankhya Yoga deals with Sambandha. But Sambandha specifically within the realm of our experience. And that is more or less to point out how all these different energies are related to Krishna. The atheist Kapila Dev takes Krishna out of the equation and just analyzes material elements. That earth is solid matter, water is elements that bring everything together, cohesive matter, energy that has cohesiveness. Fire is transformative matter, the energy that transforms either, for instance, liquid into gas, or in the absence of fire, liquid into ice. So fire is the element that transforms. For instance, Jata Agni within our stomach transforms what we eat into something that can be assimilated into the body eventually. And when Jata Agni is not working properly, then we get what's called or toxic matter, which blocks the channels in the body or poisons the different elements of the body. Therefore, in Ayurveda, the basis of health is having a proper digestive fire. Without a proper digestive fire, there are different kinds of digestive fires. There is Sama Agni, there's Tiksha Agni, there's Manda Agni, and there is, let's see. When Agni is equal and balanced, it's called Sama Agni. When it's too high, it's called Tiksha Agni. And when it's slow, it's called Manda Agni. And when it's variable, it's called Vishama Agni. Jata Agni is just the fire of digestion in the stomach. Which is, in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Panchayamani Mahabaho. No. Pancha Anamayam. Aham Vaishvanaro Bhutva Praninam Deham Ashvija Prana Pana Samayugdva Pachamninam Chaturvidam. So Jata Agni is also called Vaishvara, Vaishvano, Vaishvano, Aham Vaishvano Bhutva. See if I pronounce it properly. Aham Vaishvano Bhutva Praninam Deham Ashvitya. Vaishvanaro Bhutva Praninam Deham Ashvitya. Prana Pana Samayukta Pacham Anam Chaturvidam. The reason why Sankhya Yoga is considered to be the same as devotional service is because by Sankhya Yoga one is supposed to come to the platform of Brahman realization. That by study of Sankhya Yoga one can understand what's the difference between the soul and the body, and what's the difference between the super soul and the soul, and the super soul and the material elements. Then one is supposed to take shelter of the super soul. In other words, Sankhya Yoga is a path leading to meditation on the super soul. to be able to see how the super soul is present everywhere. For instance, in the last 6 chapters, Krishna goes over Jnana Yoga, which is similar to Sankhya Yoga. And there he says things like samam pashanhi sarvatra, sama pashati ishwaram, nihinastyatmanatmanam tato yati paramgatim. Samam pashanhi sarvatra, samavastitam ishwaram, nihinastyatmanatmanam tato yati paramgatim. Samam pashanhi sarvatra, samavastitam ishwaram. We got this. Samam pashanhi sarvatra, samam sarveshu bhuteshu, tishtantam parameshwaram, vinasyava vinashantam yak pashyati sapashyati. One who can see the super soul accompanying all souls and all bodies, and who knows that neither the soul nor the super soul within the destructible body is ever destroyed, he properly sees. Then one who sees the super soul everywhere and equal everywhere does not degrade himself by the mind, thus he approaches the transcendental destination. In other words, by seeing things properly, according to Scripture, then our mind can be steady. When we don't see things properly, then we think ourselves to be independent and enjoyers of the material, controllers and enjoyers of the material nature. But ultimately, when we see that the material nature is controlled by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the only thing we can actually do is just desire. And if we desire in terms of Krishna consciousness, then we are allowed to see things properly. And when we desire things in relation to our senses and our agitated minds, then we lose our vision and we wind up in material consciousness. Therefore, at the end of the 13th chapter, Krishna has said, Kshetra Kshetragya Evam Antara Jnana Chakshusha Bhuta Prakriti Moksham Cha Ye Vidura Yanti Te Param. Kshetra Kshetragya Enam, that one who can see both his soul and the super soul, and can see the field of activities, Kshetra Kshetragya Jnanam Enam Antara Jnana Chakshusha, and can see all this with the eyes of knowledge, Bhuta Prakriti Moksham Ja, he becomes free from the modes from the material energy. Bhuta Prakriti Moksham Ja, Ye Vidura Yanti Te Param, and thus he approaches this transcendental destination. So by the indirect process, one will eventually become wise. But that will take a long time. Kapila Deva appeared in Satya Yuga. People had 100,000 years to live. A little bit longer than us. And people were more intelligent. They weren't distracted, first of all, in this age, by so many different appeals, so much ignorance, so much appeals for sense gratification. People weren't put together. There were no factories making iPhones and computers, TV sets and video games. These things didn't exist. So people had nothing to be distracted by. Basically, they could see the sun and the stars. They saw trees and animals. Nothing well, in one sense, nothing to attract their minds away from Krishna. So with a peaceful mind, they can meditate on the super soul. But with a little explanation how these material elements are related to Krishna and how the super soul within our heart is directing us, people can easily take shelter of Krishna. After all, they could understand that if I have the proper desire, then I'll go upward and life will become more steady, more enjoyable, and more enlightening. And if I have the wrong desire, if I start thinking that this is my material energy and I'm here to enjoy it, then I become degraded into the lowest species of life. People not only theoretically understood it, but they had practical realization. They were afraid of sinful activity. Now people think they have knowledge, but ultimately what they're doing is cultivating ignorance. Because by sense gratification, one becomes more and more covered. As Krishna said, well, Arjuna was asking Krishna, why do people want to do what they're supposed to do, but they don't do it anyhow? And then Krishna says, Kama Esha, Krodha Esha, Rajaguna Samudva, Mahashana Mahapatma Vidinam Ihe Varina. Because there's the energy called lust. And it turns into anger and wrath. Now, in the absence of knowledge, one may think that this is normal. This is how I'm supposed to feel. Because umena vriyate vanir, yatar darsho milena cha, ito benavrita garvas, tata teneda avrita. As the fire is covered by smoke, as the embryo is covered by the womb, as the mirror is covered by dust, so the living entity is covered by different degrees of lust. Avritam gyana etena gyanino nityavarina, kamarupena kuntiya dusprena analena cha. Thus the man's pure consciousness is covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied and which burns like fire. So, under the spell of lust, of the material energy, which has two aspects, prakatmika shakti and avaratmika shakti. One of them covers our consciousness, so we believe that the dream world that we're living in is real. Not that it doesn't exist, but it's just like it's a three-dimensional movie, or whatever, four-dimensional movie for the soul. He's imagining that he's doing so many things in the material world, but all he's doing is desiring and experiencing, perceiving and experiencing and desiring. Much the same as watching a 3D movie, whatever they call it, and believing that you're one of the characters in the movie. So we could be anything. The soul, we've inhabited so many different bodies, and we were convinced when we were an ant that we were an ant. If someone came to us and said, my dear ant, you're not an ant, you're a soul, we wouldn't understand what they're talking about. Only in the form of life this can be explained, but also in order to realize it, one has to give up the tendency to speculate and the tendency to try and enjoy the senses, which people are generally not willing to do. And even those willing to do it and try to cultivate some proper perspective on things so they can act properly, just developing the proper perspective, seeing things in relation to Krishna will not be very helpful. One has to act accordingly. For the Sankhya philosopher, then they may engage in austerities and penance and meditation and so many different things, like the impersonalists do, in order to realize Brahman. They're told that they're Brahman and that they're entangled by their desires in sense gratification, and therefore they're thinking themselves other than a spiritual being. And they're recommended to not only see things properly, but work accordingly, to try to become detached from matter by giving up material activities, etc. But that usually turns out to be a failure, unless you're living in Satya Yuga, and you're trained up from the beginning of your life, and there's nothing else to do. your mother's not saying, become a lawyer or a doctor or whatever, because there are no lawyers or doctors. Actually, there's no need to do practically anything. Even the farmers, they didn't even have to weed the plants, or they didn't. Everything was done so harmoniously in Satya Yuga that the rain would come at the right time, the sun would come at the right time, the moon would come at the right time, everything would come at the right time. So little or no effort was required to get the food that was necessary. And once people had food, they had nothing else to do but to meditate on Krishna. There's nothing more interesting for people to do at that time. But in this age, even one wants to cultivate knowledge, so much difficulty. First of all, it's difficult to hear because of the mode of ignorance. We're always ready to fall asleep. So even to hear is, the theoretical philosophy is one thing, but how to apply it, to hear about that. What do we expect? So many things to hear. And even we try to hear, we can't remember. As they say, it goes in one ear and out the other ear. Therefore, prayena yapusha sabdya kalava manda samanda matiyo manda bhagi upaudrutaha. In this age of Kali, people have but short lives. Prayena yapusha Shabdya kalavasvinige jana manda samanda matyo manda bhagi upaudrutaha. They're lazy for spiritual advancement. If they get some opportunities for sense gratification, they'll go through anything to get that. They're not, up to a point, they're not lazy for sense gratification. They'll work like a dog in order to eat like a hog, to have sex like a pigeon and sleep like a bear. So they're very enthusiastic about those things, which covers them more and more into ignorance. So they can't understand anything. Trying to explain to a normal person, a regular person on the street, that your body's changing, but you're not changing. Such a simple philosophy. But it's so difficult for people to understand. Prabhupada said it'll take them 500 years before they understand it. Because their intelligence has been taken away by illusion. Especially Maya Pritigyana, those who are given some facility to speculate. The Shudras don't, at least mental speculation. By philosophical speculation, one can absorb the philosophy and make spiritual advancement, or advancement towards spiritual knowledge. That's Sankhya Yoga. Encouraging us to assimilate the philosophy and see things in a certain perspective in relation to Krishna. But by mental speculation, one simply becomes absorbed in trying to figure out what kind of sense gratification they want ultimately. By mental speculation, usually people reach the conclusion that the highest goal of life is to gratify the senses. Chintyam aparayam cha pralayantam upashitya kama papoga paramam etavam iti nischita. That by such endeavor they believe that to gratify their senses unto the end of life is the prime necessity of human civilization, and therefore there can be no measurement for their anxieties. Because they've taken the goal of life to gratify the senses, therefore there's no end to their speculation, as Prahlad Maharaj said. Matirana Krishna paratak svatova vitopi padyeta grihavratanam adanta gobira vishatam tamizram punak punascharvata charvananam. Nitevidu Matirana Krishna, they never put their consciousness upon Krishna or hearing anything to do with Krishna. That's the last thing they want to hear about. Matirana Krishna, Paratak Sadova. But they have so many problems, so many desires, and therefore they try to find a book that teaches it how to do it yourself, how to learn from others, or a combination of both. But what is their subject matter? Adantago bira vishitam tamizram. Their subject matter is how to gratify the senses better. And the more they become absorbed in such consciousness, then the more they become bewildered by illusion. But they still wind up punak punas charvata charvanam, chewing the chewed. Why? Because they're an illusion, being absorbed in lust, anger, and greed. They're absorbed in illusion, and therefore illusion takes their memory away, spiritual memory. They may hear an instruction, and then they forget it the next moment, because they're immediately attracted to sense gratification again, or mental speculation. They even get maybe sometimes we get a realization and think, well, now I understand. And the next moment we can't remember what we understood, because we don't really see it properly. We've understood something theoretically, but we haven't really understood it. And then we lose our intelligence. Punak punas charvata charvananam. We forgot that we've tried this 1,000,000 times and never worked. But let's try it one more time. Maybe this time it's going to work. But by philosophical speculation, which is Sankhya Yoga, hearing philosophy, and trying to the best we can to assimilate it. Obviously, Devahuti could do it very quickly. Asuri Brahmana here, they were able to do it relatively quicker than we can. Because generally, even by such an endeavor, Bonam Janmanamante Gyanamamam Papadete Vasudeva Sarvamiti Suramahatma Sudulavaha. That after passing through many births and deaths, one who's actually knowledge surrenders into me, knowing me to be the cause of all causes, and all that is, such a great soul is very rare. So therefore, generally speaking, by the process of philosophical speculation, one finally arrives at the conclusion that Krishna is God. And then everything here comes from him. He's the source of everything. We can immediately accept it and engage in his service and very quickly make advancement relative to going through many, many births and deaths. If we actually accept it and then perform devotional service, then we make spiritual advancement as much as we accept it and apply it. Therefore, along with Bhakti Yoga, we also develop some knowledge of Sankhya Yoga. So we can also see this material world in relation with Krishna and engage it in Krishna's service. So Kapila Dev not only talk about how the material elements work, but how we should engage them in Krishna's service to become conscious of Krishna. The Sankhya Yogis, they analyze the material world and conclude that there's a soul and the super soul. But then they have to engage in devotional service in order to come to the platform of full understanding and realization. So we've avoided so much problems by engaging in devotional service, but without the conviction that everything here belongs to Krishna, we may say, I'm Krishna's servant, or I'm a devotee of Krishna, but unless we utilize things in Krishna's service, whatever we have, or as much as we utilize everything in Krishna's service, to that extent, then we actually realize we're Krishna's servant. And it becomes not only theoretical, but realized. Otherwise, so many people say they love God. But you ask them, who's God? They don't even know who God is, what he does. They don't know his name, what he does. They don't know anything about it. Similarly, devotees out of sentiment claim that they're devotees of Krishna, but they don't know anything about Krishna. They don't know about the process of liberation from the material energy. That's all right if they engage in devotional service, and gradually will help, Krishna will help them. As Prabhupada said, if they do all kinds of service with love. But often people who are claiming they're devotees by bad association, they stop doing all kinds of service. What to speak of with love? And at the same time, they still think they're devotees, but they're more devoted to everything, to other things other than Krishna. They just have some sentimental idea that they're devotees, but they're not really devoted. Could you imagine if someone claims he's completely devoted to playing football? His whole life he's absorbed in football, and you can ask him, how often do you play? Once a year. But I'm always thinking about it. Just waiting for that year, that one day in the year. You know, there's some one day in the year means they have some attraction for soccer, but it's not very much. So unless we engage in Krishna service, then it's very, our claim of being Krishna's madly in love with Krishna is rather shallow. Therefore, Sankhya Yoga is meant to convince us that we have to engage in Krishna service. Otherwise, when we don't, then we're in trouble. Until nature will not treat us very nicely. And at the same time, the highest Sankhya Yoga given by Kapila Dev encourages us to how wonderful it is to become a pure devotee of Krishna. How we become unlimitedly full of bliss and knowledge forever. So, one is caution about dealing with material energy. It has to be engaged in Krishna service. And the other is how wonderful it is if we fully engage ourselves in Krishna service, all the wonderful things that will happen and will experience. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Any questions or comments?
You were explaining some fire, different fire.
Yes.
So how many we have fire? Can explain a little bit, because Jataragni and another.
Vaishvano. No, there's only one fire of digestion. It's called either Jata Agni, which is just a subdivision of Agni, or Vaishvano, which means Aham Vaishvaro Buddha Praninam Deham Ashvita, that I'm the fire of digestion. So they're both the same. But there may be different degrees of different kinds of fires in the body, in the sense that Jagna Agni or Vaishnaro may be acting in different ways. Sometimes it's too intense, sometimes it's not intense enough, sometimes it's variable, and sometimes it's equal, steady. Steady when we get hungry at the same time every day, and we're satiated by eating more or less the same quantity of food every day.
Little bit. When I am hungry, I not food. I become angry. Why it is coming more?
It's called pitta. Pitta constitution. Yeah, fire is agitating. Well, it's good they have some fire. You had no fire. You become very, very thin. Anything else? Khala Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaur Premananda.
Ishwarane Swahamna Sai Maharaj ki. Srila Prabhupada ki.